start Rumble first today. God bless X. It's been such a frustrating experiment. I, like 15 minutes ago, uploaded a video going over an article that it's an old article, but kind of still relevant to the whole point of deception. And I uploaded it like 15 minutes ago, and then I noticed that it hasn't actually posted on X. It's still uploading, even though I have Starlink and supposedly have one of the fastest services around. And so I tried to like swipe the app up so that it like completely disconnects, goes away, and every time I come back, it still shows it's loading. So I'm just going to let it go. We'll hang out here for a few minutes, and then we will go back over there. So y'all need to post that you're here, and I'm going to turn my private little doggle off so that when I respond, it responds to everyone on both platforms, both YouTube and Rumble, because in the past, I'd be communicating with y'all and leave it on private and go, oh, nobody can see that. Crazy me. But I love it when you guys get onto Rumble, if you just like say, hey, I'm here. That way I know that y'all are here. I hear my husband's 68 Camaro driving around in the front. It has a very distinct sound to it. So anyway, he knows at 4 o'clock he's free to go do whatever he wants because I'm going to be busy for 2 hours. Okay, it's almost done. Crazy. So none of y'all are talking. I need you to post a little hello there. Give us a thumbs up on Rumble. Subscribe. It's free. But the more people, not just following, but the more people subscribing on Rumble, the more they, hey, Dara, the more they, the higher they rank in suggesting our videos for other people to see. So it does help. All right, there we go. So they finally got it uploaded. So let me go back and open the space. I already have typed out. Start now. Invite everybody. So y'all get to see the behind the scenes. Because I usually do this first before I log into Rumble. All right, invite sent. Invite in a post. Come on in. All right, I got to turn the volume up so I can hear everybody. And y'all can hear them. All right. Okay. Hello, everybody. That was a long, extended wait for a crazy video. And all right, there's Stellar. Let's bring her up as a co-host so when they dump me out, we don't lose our space. I'm actually shocked. They haven't dumped me out yet. So Stellar, if you'll keep your eye out for Bridget, I'm going to go ahead and go because we've got some crazy stuff to go over today. So just as a reminder, where we left off was we had talked about the Sopindus, which was the industrial merger with the World Commerce Corporation, and kind of the melding and setting up of the infrastructure. And we got to let's see. I had it marked. Hey, Stellar.
Yeah.
Were you here on Friday?
Yes, I was.
Okay. And did we get to the colony, or were we just up to that? Because I have it marked that we were just up there. We didn't actually talk about the um the Dignity Colony, right? I just mentioned it.
No.
Okay.
You mentioned it. It was like a teaser.
Okay. All right. So that's where we're going to start off today. And part of the setup is that this vast empire, what you and I call Operation Gladio, of around the World Anti-Communist League, all of those apparatuses. The author is referring to this empire and different facets of it. And another one of the front companies specifically that was used by the CIA in Germany, namely the BND, where Reinhard Gehlen hung out, was called Mirex.
Bridget's here. Bridget's here.
Okay, thank you. Mirex is Merex, Mirex. So you can think of it as a world commerce corporation, very similar in purpose. Mirex was basically B&D provided quote unquote surplus arms to Mirex to be sold in the Middle East to places where they were destabilizing. And Scorzini's partner in launching Mirex, Merex, was a former SS officer by the name of Gerhard Mertens. It looks like Martin except for it's instead of an A, it's got an E. So we're just going to call it Martins, the German pronunciation of that. And it's Mertins. So, she declined it. I don't know why. You've got Otto Skorzeny, and remember, we already know all of this. We know that him and his partner, Gerhard Martins, also was partners in the construction of the U.S. military bases. And one of the ways they were compensated for that is by an Air Force contract to build those bases, in which they grossly overcharged the U.S. government, which is kind of like the back way of money laundering money into Reinhard Gehlen for him being the trainer of Operation Gladio. So this is not new to us. So Mirex is basically a weapons trafficking company that Otto Skorzeny is using as he trains these Gladio cells, which he is like their designated trainer. Mirex is one of the avenues to dump weapons into these cells as quote unquote surplus. So Martins had extensive dealings in South America, i.e. Operation Condor. And a lot of people have trouble kind of linking those two together, the Operation Condor with Operation Gladio, because most often they think Operation Gladio was exclusively Europe. And then, there would be no kind of linkage to Operation Condor. There's lots of linkage, and it all basically goes back to the Nazis. So Martins frequently used Nazis in Latin America as part of his network. The most famous one that he used was Klaus Barbie, who obviously they were working in the Nazi apparatus together. And of course, we know that Klaus Barbie was responsible for thousands of people's death, especially in France. Barbie became Martin's exclusive dealer in Bolivia. In Chile, it appeared that one of the chief contacts for Martins was none other than Paul Schaefer, the guy who set up Dignity Colony. Martins was apparently so impressed with Schaefer and the colony that as controversy began to engulf the colony, he being Martin, established a charity and called it the Circle of Friends of Dignity Colony. So they could, circle the wagons and not get rid of their facility, which was the Dignity Colony. And basically, that was kind of a money raiser in Germany to support all of the heinous crimes that was going on at the quote unquote Dignity Colony. And there were lots of German politicians that got involved in the supporting of the Dignity Colony. Over the years, oh shoot. I guess we're not allowed to talk about the Dignity Colony. They just crashed the whole site. Oh my goodness. You can't even make this shit up. What the heck? Hello, because X is being ornery. Yes, they are. They always are. Okay.
It's doing exactly what, it's just crazy.
It was doing the same thing. Yep, it was going in and out, and then all of a sudden it showed that you were having connection problems. So we were trying to fill in the space, hoping that you'd be able to reconnect and reset it, but it didn't work. So I'm going to go send out invites again.
Oh my gosh. Okay. So basically, I guess we're not supposed to talk about the Dignity Colony and its connections to the CIA and the BND, but we're going to do it anyway. And we're also going to talk about all of the Nazis that are associated with it, to include where we left off, Klaus Barbie. All right. So Klaus Barbie became Otto Skorzeni's partner, Gerhard Martin's principal contact in Bolivia. And Paul Schaefer, becomes Martin's contact in Chile. And there's going to be a corresponding one of these in every location. The Dignity Colony is basically a terrorist training camp. And it becomes, after they coup the government of Chile, a torture location, kind of like a black site, if you will. The entire basement is set up in, there are cells that are created, and all the cells have acoustical, so that you can't hear the people when they're being tortured, and they do heinous things to them. There are a bunch of pedophiles in this Dignity Colony where they're abusing children. They're also manufacturing weapons inside of this compound. It is almost like a mini Nazi compound in the middle of Chile. So the connection, though, that we want to concentrate on is the Nazi element, because we fairly well established the Nazi backbone, if you will, to not just NATO, but Operation Gladio in general with Otto Skorzeny in Europe. But a lot of people don't realize that connection goes into South America in the creating of Operation Condor, the staffing of it, the funding of it, and everything else. And this book does a very good job of doing that. So it basically says that Gerhard Martin's provided support to the colony even after it was identified as a guy who had basically been involved in pedophilia in Germany, that had moved to South America, just like Jim Jones, who was discovered as doing many of the same things as far as experimenting on his commune, that somehow had some religious affiliation. And they're moving to Guyana, which also happens to be in Latin America. Can't even make this up. And in a country that we had couped their government. So very similar things. This is not a one-off operation. So Schaefer and his operations were part of Scorzini's and had been using the Nazi underground. There were also reports that Skorzeny and other key players in this network, such as Hans Ulrich Rudel, and I'm going to spell his name, Hans-Ulrich, last name Rudel, were guests of the colony. And also, there was other prominent Nazis that visited, such as Joseph Mengele, Menge, Mengele, sorry, and Walter Roth, Rauff. They were both of those were also guests of the colony, and others. So then the author starts looking into the B&D's connection, and you find out he does a little bit of background on the fact that the B&D was set up as part of the Galen organization. Sometimes in the early days, it was referred to just as the organization, ORG, or Galen organization, and that Reinhard Galen, as we know, was an intelligence officer for Hitler on the Eastern Front, and he was responsible, along with Otto Skorzeny, in setting up the stay-behind units. The author goes on to say Galen and his staff had assembled a treasure trove of intelligence on the Soviet Union, and that they had turned that against the Soviets post-World War by having basically bought their freedom with this information in the eyes of the UK and the US, which is why we, airevac'd Galen into the United States to debrief him. Also, it says that Galen used this material on his stay-behind unit and information that they had gotten during the occupation of the Soviet Union as a bargaining chip for the U.S. to basically secure him and his counterparts' security after World War II. Reinhard had worked closely with Skorzeny on the Eastern Front. On behalf of his organization, Galen oversaw a thing called WALLI, and I had not seen this before, WALLI, which was intelligence networks that operated behind the enemy lines. So he's basically describing stay-behind units, or Operation Gladio, as it was later referred to. At the time, it's called werewolf units, but I've never heard it referred to as WALLI, WALLI. So I found that very interesting. It may be German words for, just like an acronym that's basically talking about werewolf units, because that's what they called them, and maybe the W is werewolf. He goes on to say that Galen and Skorzeny would attempt to combine the WALLI network with the Zeppelin stay-behind units that Skorzeny oversaw to combine all of the stay-behind units as a package deal for the Americans. Reinhard Galen found himself being courted by the U.S. and the remnants of the OSS, and met with Wild Bill Donovan and Alan Dulles in order to set up the negotiations that we know ended up with all of this being folded under NATO. And by 1946, that he had the full backing of the U.S. Galen began to assemble the German BND, which is going to be stood up to be the CIA's counterpart. And eventually, the Galen organization transformed into the BND. And that was around 1955 officially. But it operated post-World War II under Galen the whole time. Both the organization and the early BND were key components of this underground network that many people considered a continuation of the Nazi Third Reich, of which the Dignity Colony definitely had ties to this apparatus and predated the Pinochet coup. As a matter of fact, many people that's done the research believe it was part of the coup, like where it was basically a stay behind unit in Chile where they stashed weapons. And then they would go on to create weapons manufacturing capability that may have been used in the eventual coup in 1970. Because we're talking this early, as much as 15 or 20 years before. Murex, the arms trading firm under Gerhard Martin, was founded and enjoyed a close relationship with Reinhard Galen's BND and Skorzeny himself. All of this strongly implies that it was all of one network and working in conjunction with the colony in Chile. There is evidence that the colony participated in a larger Operation Condor presence throughout Latin America. In 1979, reports entitled Activity of Certain Foreign Intelligence Agencies in the U.S., submitted to the Subcommittee on International Relations in the U.S. Senate, noted, quote, established in 1976, Operation Condor is an international consortium of intelligence services of Argentina, Bolivia, Brazil, Chile, Paraguay, and Uruguay. Condor conducts joint operations against common targets in member countries for the purpose of countering what it calls terrorism and subversion, unquote. These operations frequently involved assassination, disappearing political agitators. The Condor network was maintained with extensive files on anti-regime activists. In addition to the intelligence services of the southern cone of South America, elements of the CIA also assisted in setting up the Condor apparatus. At an operational level, plenty of agents were enlisted as well, particularly Italian fascist terrorists, which would be Operation Gladio. They also used the anti-Castro Cubans or Cuban exiles that were trained by the CIA in Miami and elsewhere. They also set up a coordination of United Revolutionary Organizations, or CORU, CORU, which became a militant Cuban exile network responsible for the bombing of Cuban Flight 455 that resulted in the 73 deaths, which we've covered before. Besides terrorism, many of the Condor partners were knee-deep in drug trafficking, because of course they were, because that's all part of Operation Gladio. The DINA, which was the special, cruel national police that was set up by the CIA in Chile, and its successor organization were funded with the proceeds of cocaine sales that were approved by Pinochet, which of course, because that's exactly how Gladio works. The Cuban exiles of CORU were also deeply involved in drug trafficking. And then there was Klaus Barbie, Gerhard Martin. Barbie participated in condo meetings on behalf of the Bolivian intelligence services. I hope you guys are getting the feeling that the Nazi apparatus was not defeated in World War II. The key figure for Condo on behalf of DINA was a man by the name of Michael Vernon Townley, one of the colony's key liaisons with the Chilean intelligence service. Townley basically is a CIA agent. He organized two of the most infamous operations of Condor: the attempted assassination of Bernardo Leighton in Rome and the successful assassination of Orlando Letelier in Washington, D.C., which was the former Chilean ambassador that got stranded in the United States when they couped and murdered Allende. His car was blown up in Washington, D.C., where an American also was killed. The exact role of the colony and what it did with Operation Condor is still up for discovery. The Senate report mentioned before makes it clear that the U.S. intelligence officials believe that the colony was an active participant in Operation Condor. Condor may have actually originated at the colony itself. Some in the hierarchy proposed that very thing to the DINA, and there's no indication that that initiative was approved or disapproved, but it would have been the perfect place, as I described it before, with the, like 6 or 8 foot walls, the Constantine wire, the dogs, that and all of the munitions to protect it. They even mined some of the areas. So, sure looks like it might have been a command center, just saying. On the whole, the similarities between Condor and the program that was ran called Night and Fog in Nazi Germany are almost identical. The Nazi diaspora in South America, of which the colony was a node, would mean that that was a logical follow-on to what they were already doing. And of course, this doesn't even bring into all of the medical experiments, like in Brazil when they did the eugenesis type experiments on cloning, dealing with the twins. I mean, they literally took all of the elements of Nazi Germany and moved them in many perspectives to South America. It is likely that at least some of the disappeared quote unquote guests of the colony were under the auspices of Operation Condor. There is also speculation that colony's powerful radio equipment was part of the Condor communication among the different countries. Also, there was a biological warfare program that was maintained at the colony, which would have lined up perfectly with all of the German scientists. Another important contact for the colony was a European group that we've covered fairly extensively called La Circle, or the Circle. It's also referred to as the Pinay Group, Pinay. Some people have referred to it as the Pesenti Group, Pesenti. La Circle had its origins in a concept that's really familiar to us called Pan-European Union. That was a movement that was set up by Comte Richard Kalergi in 1923. The Pan-European Union was the oldest movement geared to unify Europe, which came out of the British Round Table and the plan back in the late 1800s called the British Round Table or the Fabian Society. So its idea basically come to fruition after World War II. The Pan-European Union and the Anglo-American intelligence officers became concerned that Kalergi was not suitable and active enough in his anti-communist jargon in order to be able to continue leading the organization. To counter Kalergi, a rival movement was launched by the CIA in 1948 called the European Movement, EM. They basically had in mind a Joseph Rittinger, Rettinger, to be in charge of it. He was a little more aggressive, more their style. The European movement, in turn, received much of the funding from the CIA and their front organizations like the American Committee on a United Europe. Imagine that. Another NGO funding the Fabian Society's agenda. From the get-go, the ACUE, and that stands for American Committee on United Europe, was heavily staffed with who? Oh, OSS guys. All of the OSS guys, by the way, that had a business interest in Europe to begin with that had basically been in bed with Hitler. Nothing to see there. Some of those people were Wild Bill Donovan and Alan Dulles. Also, Thomas Braden, Braden, who was a journalist and a CIA agent, because of course he was. Also, Charles Hook, Hook, who was the chairman of Armco Steel Corporation. And do you know who worked for Armco Steel in 1950? None other than Otto Skorzeny. So, the American Committee for Uniting Europe, basically funded by the CIA, launched the European movement and at the same time created a youth wing of it, because we always have to have those street thugs, and a grooming project. So they called that the European Youth Campaign. And it basically was a counter to a youth campaign that Kalergi was also setting up. Another organization that grew out of all of this was the Bilderberger Group. Did y'all know that? That had its formation as a part of everything that I just talked about. That forum, of course, we know brought together the US and Europeans into this quote unquote policy-making body. And Le Cercle began as an offshoot of the group. It was initially organized in 1952-53 timeframe. And
when you broke up, when you said what group was it?
The Le Cercle was basically a subsidiary of the Bilderberger Group. And it was set up around the 1952-53 timeframe. And one of the most infamous people that initially joined this group was none other than West German Chancellor Konrad Adenauer. Now, keep in mind that Konrad Adenauer is the very same chancellor that was in bed with the CIA and this whole Gladio NATO concept, because he's the one that selected Reinhard, or went along with the plan. Reinhard Gehlen was already selected. But it was the CIA that was also interfering with the election to ensure Konrad Adenauer got elected so they could ensure that Reinhard Gehlen was going to be in charge of their version of the CIA, namely the B&D, in order to be able to control all of what they are going to control. Because almost immediately, remember, from another book that we've read, Crypto AG is set up by both the German B&D and the CIA to spy on 120 countries eventually. And it is done as a joint project between the B&D and the CIA. None of that stuff would have been possible if you didn't have your puppet, Reinhard Gehlen, sitting in the B&D and your puppet, Adenauer, sitting as the Chancellor of West Germany. All of it was part of the plan. Also, a part of Le Cercle was a guy by the name of Antoine Pinay, Pinay, who represented the French in this collaboration. So sometimes it is referred to as the Pinay Group or Le Cercle, or sometimes just called the Cercle. The circle was a very confidential, almost secret, like the Bilderbergs. They didn't want people knowing who they were because they were covertly working on a united Europe agenda. As time went on, um, they moved up in status and basically kind of operated alongside the Bilderbergs and not as necessarily a subordinate to it. The Bilderbergs has always been dominated by the US and Europe, mainly the old Western European powers like the Netherlands and the UK and those, the French. And in the early days, Le Cercle was primarily dominated by Catholic nations that were more in the central portion of like Spain and some of the others that had a higher percentage of Catholic as a population than the Bilderbergs, which was primarily, excuse me, Protestant, which is kind of an interesting dynamic as this continues to play out. Because remember, in many of these operations, they're going to use the Catholic Church, which makes the whole thing very interesting. Like the rat lines use the Catholic Church. We use the Vatican for money laundering for the drug operations. We use the Catholic missionaries in Vietnam to move over 1 million people. So it allows you another lens to look at these operations. And depending on which church they're using, it kind of lends itself to be able to know who is the impetus behind them, because you will see these things play out primarily in some of the operations and which church is being used, which church missionaries or subordinate programs are being used. Okay. For the purpose of this conversation, there's a lot of interaction with the circle and the Catholic Church in the form of organizations like Opus Dei and the Sovereign Military Order of Malta, because remember that almost all of the initial cadre of Operation Gladio and the CIA that are acting as part of Operation Gladio were all inducted into the Sovereign Military Order of Malta. They all became parts of the Knights of Malta. And every time that they would have a meeting, they all just so happened to show up, which also gave them the opportunity to collaborate planning-wise under the guise of being a member of the Knights of Malta, which is very, very interesting, I think. So researcher Robert Hutchinson even went so far as to say that the circle was said to be another Opus Dei auxiliary operation of the Knights of Malta. Also present were numerous intelligence officers that weren't necessarily members of that, but affiliated with Operation Gladio, especially members of the Western European nations. One of those organizations that participated a lot was the French intelligence service, which is called the SDECE. SDECE. I don't know if they actually use that as an acronym, but basically that's their version of the CIA. Also, the German BND, which is their version of the CIA, and the Vatican has its own intelligence organization that all participated in the meetings of the circle. By the late 1960s, American and British intelligence officers had also joined. Many of the British spies were veterans of the above mentioned Special Operations Executive, the SOE, as well as many of these other organizations that had cropped up, the Bilderbergs, the Circle, and many others. One of those was a guy by the name of Lord Julian Amery, Amery. He became the circle's chairman and president for several years. Amory's old SOE comrade, Billy McLean, his whole name is Neil, his nickname is Billy McLean, McLean. Another one, Sir Peter Tennant, Tennant, and Harry Sporborg, Sporborg. Then, probably the most infamous one that I've came across repeatedly is Brian Crozier. And you spell his last name Crozier. Crozier was not a previous intelligence asset, but he was linked to many of the organizations that had been used as front organizations in the UK for MI6 operations. Tennant, in addition to Tennant and Sporborg, other key Crozier's backers came from the SOE and included Sir Peter Wilkinson and Stephen Hastings. Stephen Hastings had attended several circle meetings, although there was never any confirmation he was actually a member. And we when we went over the circle before, like almost a year ago, there were a lot of people that were invited to meetings based on their area of expertise that were never actual members of the circle. And so it's very difficult because there's no official roster of who's the members. You kind of have to go about figuring out whether or not they're a member in a backdoor kind of way, because a lot of people attended the meetings. Okay. In addition to Amory's other friends, you had Roland Winn, Winn, and a Belgian colonel by the name of Henry Bernard. So Sir Peter Tennant also was recruited into the British SOE by a banker by the name of Sir Charles Hambro. Now, we've come across Hambro Bank because they were intimately involved in World War II and the financing. Hambro was basically a Danish-British banking house and owned the Hambro Bank. Henry Sporborg, a Circle member who did have the Special Operations SOE background, had worked for the Hambro Bank as late as the 1970s. Hambro was a partner of William Stevenson, and William Stevenson ran the front company called British American Canadian Corporation, BACC. BACC merged with Wild Bill Donovan's WCC, the World Commerce Corporation, because they were both front companies for their respective intelligence entities. So now you have a British piece and an American piece of a front company that's going to be fronting for Operation Gladio. And Wild Bill Donovan, of course, was a member of the Knights of Malta. So the future Circle members, along with the Knights of Malta, if you compare those two rosters, you come across a few names. One of the most notorious names for our purposes is William Casey, who we know not only did he work for Donovan's law firm, which started out in Buffalo, New York, and eventually moved to New York City, and was instrumental in setting up the World Commerce Corporation. So naturally, all of the initial front company business that the CIA is going to get into with setting up Operation Gladio all goes to the World Commerce Corporation, so Donovan can make a quick buck off of it. So, as part of this entire operation, you have 3 UK organizations that are set up to assist Brian Cozier in his mission of doing the British piece of Operation Gladio. Those organizations are called the Institute for the Study of Conflict, SHIELD, and a company called 6I, like MI6 backwards without the M. 6I. The former, the Institute for the Study of Conflict, was basically their version of a think tank. And basically all it did was put out propaganda. And all of their propaganda notoriously had to do with quote unquote anti-communist. It basically did everything to paint the Soviet Union as, oh my God, they're going to come over the Volga Gap at any minute. And if we don't guard against that and do all of this military crap, we're going to die from a nuclear bomb because any minute they're going to drop the nuclear bomb. SHIELD and 6I were basically set up as private intelligence operations outside of MI6 so they could do covert off the books operations. SHIELD was basically focused on domestic issues where 6I basically looked outside. So the UK set up front companies under their intelligence apparatus, one to spy on their own people and one to spy on everybody else, is basically what that's saying. They used the internal facing one, SHIELD, to interfere with the election and ensure Margaret Thatcher got elected. That's how you know unequivocally she wasn't a good person, because the apparatus supported her. Curiously, an American member of 6I and sometimes Circle participant was a guy by the name of Arnold Silver. He just so happens to have been an Army counterintelligence corps who transferred after World War II to the CIA. He also worked intimately with Walter Mosig, Mosig, and Otto Skorzeny before signing up to work at Sop Angus. So he basically covered the entire spectrum of Operation Gladio front companies that existed at the time. Other key links to the Circle were Otto van Habsburg's Center of Documentation and Information, the Brussels-based Academy Europe Science Politics, AESP, that was commonly referred to as the Academy. Now, this is going to be very, very important as the story unfolds. So remember this. AESP, referred to as the Academy, and it's in Brussels. Another one was called, they're all in their native words. So it's basically the Defense of Civilian, the Committee for International Defense of Civilian Forces. It was a French organization. Its acronym is CIDCC. It basically sought a united front of both Catholics and Protestants. It tried to bridge the gap. There was another organization that was referred to as Interdoc, INTERDOC. That was a Dutch and German network that worked inside of the Circle for many years. Outside of Europe, they partnered with, drumroll, World Anti-Communist League, of course, which the author notes was made up of a bunch of third world thugs that escaped the World War II trials because they were all war criminals, which is absolutely an accurate description of all of them. They colluded with Western intelligence, with military officers, and the World Anti-Communist League was intimately involved in Operation Condor, which we know that. They also was intimately involved with Operation Gladio, which this guy seems to miss. He eventually gets to it, but I don't think he understands how big it actually was. They were also, the Circle and the World Anti-Communist League worked very closely with the National Strategy of Information Center, NCIS, not the naval thing, and the Heritage Foundation, oddly enough. The Heritage Foundation comes up an awful lot in this conversation. So now to link back, and then we'll be finished for the day, the colony dignity, or dignity colony, there is a crucial link between it and the Circle complex, and that link can be found in Franz Joseph Strauss. I'm going to spell his name: Franz, middle name Joseph, Strauss, Strauss. He was the chairman of the Christian Socialist Union, which was a party of Bavaria, and a one-time West German defense minister and perpetual candidate for chancellor. Strauss was one of the most powerful and influential figures for decades in German politics. He appears to have hooked up with the Circle complex from the beginning. Strauss also appears to have been close to Opus Dei, with some sources claiming that he was actually a member of it. But it's a secret society, so it's kind of hard to tell who is and who isn't. At a minimum, he had dealings with many Opus Dei members. This links Strauss to the Circle, and on a whole with Opus Dei is interesting when you look at it in light of Chile. The Opus Dei people opened up their first center in Chile in 1950. And within a few years, they had over 2,000 members and 15,000 co-operators. In the years leading up to the coup, the Opus Dei were collaborating with the CIA in a conservative think tank called the Institute for General Studies. It basically was a primary mover and shaker in the coup to overthrow Allende. It comes up repeatedly. In the aftermath of the coup, the Opus Dei crowd would be placed throughout Pinochet's government to operate in the repressive dictatorship, to include being in charge. All of the people at the very top of their education system were all Opus Dei and Le Circle members. Well, because remember, you have to take over the education system. Whether a connection between Strauss became involved with the colony officially in the 1970s when he joined Gerhard Martin Circle of Friends of Dignity Colony. Strauss was a guest at the colony several times. He reportedly signed a portrait. There is a signed portrait of Strauss that hung in one of the central buildings in the colony as if he was a benefactor for over 20 years, at least until the late 1990s. Shortly after Strauss had become involved in the colony, it would appear that the Circle complex went to work defending it against all attacks. The chief instrument for this support appears to have been a German Circle auxiliary, meaning the Circle auxiliary for Germany, known as the Institute, and then some crazy 20-letter word, basically looking like it means democracy. The acronym is IFD, but it stands in translation as the Institute for Democracy Research. But they put democracy research all in one word in the German version. So the Institute for Democracy Research. That sounds a lot like something that, like the NED or something. The vice president of this Institute for Democracy Research was a guy by the name of Count Hans Huyn, Huyn. He was also a member of the Circle and the CSU political party official who served as the foreign policy advisor to Strauss throughout the 1970s. Huon was also a member of Brian Cozier's 6I private intelligence network, which is an MI6 front. There he would rub shoulders with veterans such as Peter Tennant and Henry Sporberg. This Democracy Research Committee featured two longtime colony defenders, one by the name of Dr. Lothar Bossel, Bossle, who served as the director and later president of the Democracy Research think tank. Bossel was also a CSU backer and professor of sociology at a university in Germany. Bossel had acquired this post through personal invitation of none other than Franz Joseph Strauss. Bossel was a staunch supporter of Pinochet and an apologist for his dictatorship regime. And he described himself as a key contact person for the colony Dignity. Reportedly, Bossel was a guest there on at least 4 different occasions. Another one of the Democracy Research think tank backers was an attorney, Dieter Blumenwitz, Blumenwitz. He featured and was billed as an expert in international law. Blumenwitz was also a staunch backer of Pinochet's, the dictator. So he and Brian Cozier helped work on a new constitution for the dictatorship in Chile. Blumenwitz reportedly visited the colony with Bossel a few times. Eventually, he would intervene on behalf of the colony to block Amnesty International from publishing a report that documented the torture chambers that the DINA had set up there. In other words, he had become an attorney, an apologist for the colony that was basically harboring terrorists and pedophiles. On the whole, it would seem that the ties between the colony and the circle, at least the German wing of it, was very, very close. So that's going to do it for today. The next section that we're going to get into, which will be part 5, is actually when he gets around to Operation Gladio and a thing called the Bloodstone, which the reference to Bloodstone was the first time I had heard the way he describes it. So it's going to be very interesting for us, even the old Operation Gladio veterans, because it is a new concept. And again, that's kind of the reason why I wanted to do this book, because this guy is one of the few people that took what it took us like 9 months to figure out and piece all together. He did in this book. Plus he adds a few elements that I had never come across, which to me just makes it even more important in rounding out a complete understanding of what Operation Gladio is and the extent to which all of the different pieces are connected. So there you have it. Anybody got any comments?
I'm amazed about the past stuff that still connects with the stuff today. And as these things are getting dismantled and exposure is being brought out, it's just very mind-boggling when you see it from one side, but not digging as far deep as that is. And then, the evil factor with it as well, besides the slavery. But, it's just, I gotta keep, yeah. Thank you.
So I agree with you because, a lot of us were under the assumption that we, number one, defeated Nazi Germany and that we had actually defeated that philosophical approach. And you find out that not only did we not defeat Nazi Germany, we may have defeated Germany, not Nazi Germany, but that it manifested itself all over the world under the form of anti-communist, which in and of itself is an insult to people all over the world, that they would take something as vile and evil as communism and then use that as a shield to hide something that is equally, if not worse, than communist itself. So the whole concept of what we're learning is evil upon evil, right? That you would take an evil concept of what you supposedly are fighting against, i.e., communism, and then inflict upon people something that is twice as evil using evil as a cloaking device. I mean, just if you can wrap your head around, go ahead.
That's the part that's so mind-boggling, because
Yes.
remember in the very beginning part when we first started talking, or when you first started talking about Operation Gladio, the stay behinds, and all these different things in the cartels, I asked you back then, and you said, you know what, we'll answer that question in the future. And that was my question. Who actually won World War II? And then, we know now it was definitely the Nazis. I mean, we saw with what was going on with Ukraine and the Azorovs and all that other stuff, and then learning all this.
Well, it's bigger than the Nazis, though. But it's bigger than the Nazis. It's the international syndicate.
That's
yeah.
just like a section of it.
Yeah.
That's just like one layer of it. But look how huge it was. And we hear about the Mengele and like the like all the different things and experiments that they did on people. I mean, I worked in the dental industry, and some of the things that they did and experimented are used today in current orthodontics. Appliances and stuff about stretching out the jaw. Well, anyway, so with all these different things that come into play, and then learning that they're scientists for NASA. What we have now is NASA. It was started by them. And then learning that there was a whole network within the Vatican of getting Hitler and group that couldn't come out in public, but sent them probably to. It's like all the stories and conspiracies are actually flipping true. And now with all this stuff being exposed and whistleblowers and books and all that stuff, it's just mind blowing.
Yes, it is. You know what's funny about this? So I came across the term, reading somebody else's information, the term parapolitical. And like every term, that the anti-communist, and then you do a search on anti-communist on Yandex, and I found the World Anti-Communist League. Then you come across another term of paramilitary, and we all, Bridget and all of us, talked about, did different deep dives into these terms. And every week, just about, we've come up with a new term to search on and come up with a different slice of this pie. And so a couple of weeks ago, when I came across the term parapolitical, I was like, son of a bitch, there was another one. So I did a quick search on Amazon Books, and I found this guy's book. Well, for those of you on Rumble, it's just a paperback book. It wasn't available in hard copy. It kind of looks like it's a message that has like a Sharpie that basically redacted all of the pieces on the cover other than the actual title and the author's name. So it's kind of an interesting, and then on the back of the cover, it actually kind of looks like the format of another message. So interesting way to cloak your book. But unlike most books, like the hardback books where you get into it, and at the very beginning, it's got like the publishing house, because of course nobody's going to publish this book, and all of the dates that it was published and all that stuff. I looked at the beginning, because that was one of the first things I always do when I buy a new book, is look at when it's published, because I know based on my head now a timeline on when all of this stuff came out. And I know when I start reading it, what they knew and what they didn't know at that time, potentially. And it helps you when you're reading the book, because obviously something that was declassified in 1990 is not going to be in a book that you're reading in 1970. And I've been very careful with you guys. Like when we were reading that one book, what was that one? The Terror book, the Prelude to Terror, that was basically written based on a bunch of CIA agent documents that had been stolen when they were let go. So depending on when they got those documents, it may or may not reflect some of the other stuff that we've known since then. So timing is always very important. When I got this book, I looked at the beginning, and the first 2 pages basically is just a title page. And the next page is a title page. And just like an overview. And then it goes right into the book. It's not really written with chapters. They call them essays. And so I'm like, what the hell? I just noticed when you were talking, Stellar, the very back page, when I open up the back cover, which I never look at, because this book doesn't really even have like well, I mean, it has a little bit, not the size of an index that I'm used to. I just noticed the barcode on the very back page before the back cover. The guy is from Orlando, and he published this book in January of 2025. That's amazing. So we're probably...
Holy cow, it's current.
Yes. Current in, I mean, obviously it's they're talking about, but he has the, that to me is just amazing. So Bridget, we've got another quest. We're going to have to hunt this guy down too. Cause I could actually visit with this guy.
That's cool.
Yeah, that could be dangerous. Sean?
Hello, yeah. I was on a previous an Irish space with you not too long ago. We're talking about the CIA and how they're the biggest drug gang in the world, the biggest arms gang in the world, all that. And I was just thinking of what you're saying about Operation Gladio and all that. It's all to do with the global elite who are behind all of this, it seems like. Who is actually in control of America and the West? I mean, the powers that be, the globalists, as we call them, this sort of nebulous sort of group of people who are controlling all of this and who Trump is now standing up against, it seems to me, and has put a cat among the pigeons there. But maybe he was allowed to succeed. They tried to, there was some, it seems like they're not just one group of people who have one idea about how things should be. There are various factions, and some factions, you know, one of the factions said, well, maybe we're going too far with all this, reducing the global population down to 500 million and creating a prison planet at the behest of our NHI overlords. Maybe we should go more pro-human, and maybe we should let Trump play out, and maybe we should go back to a more conservative vision of humanity, a more humane version of humanity, not to create a prison planet where everybody's enslaved and we can create our billionaire's paradise. Maybe there's another way. What do you think?
I think you're naive. I'm just kidding. So that's an interesting comment, actually. Very insightful. I disagree with it, and I'll tell you why. I came up with a term in order to drown out all of the people that want to pick fights and avoid the actual big message for this group of people, and I refer to them as the International Syndicate. Now, they are international and they are a crime syndicate, so that those words have meaning. They were not nonchalantly thrown together in order to come up with a nickname. This criminal syndicate, in order to come up with the plan to begin with, has no ability to feel like you and I do. They are basically like droid people. They are void of compassion and empathy, or they would have never come up with a plan to interbreed races to come up with a superhuman and to then enslave entire continents of people, because people who have empathy and sympathy for people are incapable of being that maniacally evil. So no, I don't think that they have any ability to rethink their agenda. They're too far into their agenda to pull back because now they've been spotted. And I think what Trump did in his first term was counter them with things like the Abraham Accords and made them accelerate their agenda to the point where now they've outed themselves. And so I do not believe for 1 minute that they have any regret for doing anything that they did. I also think that they had every plan to do it in a much slower, not obvious way, but that in Trump coming into office the first time thwarted their timeline and created the ability for them not to be able to lock us all down with COVID and create their smart cities and the tracking and the implants and everything else that they had on their agenda. And they've made very clear, actually. And that small bit of reprieve then meant what they were going to do in those 4 years and then the Biden 4 years, a total of 8 years, they had to cram into the 4 years under Biden, which made them out themselves in a much more spectacular, obvious way, so that it woke up 10 times more people than they thought would ever be awake by the time they got to the point where they were locking our cages. And so, do I believe that they're a homogenous group where they all are in lockstep? No, I think your assessment of there being factions is very well proven in that they don't necessarily all want, just like what we were just talking about right now. The differences between the Kalergis and the Cozier faction of Le Circle. That's a perfect example. That happens throughout this entire timeline where they will have someone who they kind of like, but he's not like the best one. And so he's not doing things as fast or as articulate as they want. And so, and it happens in governments too, like with Saddam Hussein. They're always grooming their next dictator. So as soon as they put Saddam Hussein in, they looked for his to his defense minister underneath the table and was grooming him to be Saddam Hussein. Because when you're dealing with criminals are never going to completely be under your control. So you cannot ever afford not to have someone that you control in as a head of state in one of these critical locations. And so if you coup a government and you install someone that you can control, you are going to be grooming the next one. And they all know this, by the way. They're constantly looking for their replacement. So, and in the case with Saddam Hussein, he assassinated because he got good intel that it was the defense minister, and he assassinated him before they could assassinate Saddam Hussein. So there is not a consistent, harmonious operation inside of the international syndicate. There's lots of shit all the time. But above that fray is this entity that basically traces its beginning back to the Cecil Rhodes kind of Fabian society concept of the controllers, and then the rest of these people that are managed by the intel agencies are the people that they control to control us. Does that make sense?
Yeah, absolutely. That makes total sense. Yeah. So it's a crime cartel.
It's a crime cartel.
So, right. And that's why everything is shit. It's going to get worse.
Yes. Well, it's not going to get worse because I think that's why we elected Trump. And I think he has stepped out in front of the moving train and has been willing to take the impact of the train that had already picked up a lot of speed in order to protect us. And I think that's what we're seeing unfold. And we're seeing the machinations of a dying animal fighting to survive. But it is by no exception, it is definitely a dying animal, or it wouldn't be screaming as hard as it is screaming. If they thought they could get through this and just wait Trump out, they wouldn't be screaming the way they're screaming. They are screaming because they understand it's their last chance at survival, and I don't believe they make it. Stellar, go ahead.
Yeah, and this has been a plan that's been going on for a very long time, in my personal opinion. And, you know, when Trump came in, because there was that 16-year plan to destroy America, which was started with Obama. And you talk about, you know, he was a red diaper baby. So like you said, you know, they've had this thing planned out for a long time. You know, and it's the international syndicate, because there are no borders with these people, and it's all factions, whether it's the banking or the monetary systems, the health systems, stock market, commodities, whatever, you know, all of that is all just another little section within how the syndicate is. And when Trump came in and with those executive orders, you know, there's been a clean out that's been going on, and this exposure is being done for people to see how bad it is and was. And, you know, a lot of the different, you know, NGOs that are going on now that are being exposed, you talked about Act Blue. You talked about, was it Crowdsource or CrowdStrike, and all of these different things. And, you know, the taxpayers, the American taxpayers are the ones that were funding it, just like when the banks fell back in 2007 and 8, which was purposely done, and that was due to fraud. And, you know, so these different things that have been going on, executive orders that he put in that, you know, quote unquote, the Biden resident, whatever, didn't, you know, he kept, you know, they kept getting extended for a reason. So a lot of this stuff is getting cleaned out. But yeah, it goes, I mean, and I'm sure that there's there's people above that as well that we're learning. Thank you, Colonel Towner. I just wanted to address the international syndicate. Sorry.
Sure.
And you guys, if you can repost this space, you know, go in and explain to people that the past is really showing like what is going on today, and you know, how these coups happened, you know, different names, the Operation Gladio, you know, this Phoenix, the you know, like the Brain, MK Ultra, all of this stuff is all just like little playbooks within Operation Gladio that has been going on in the United States as well, not only in other countries as well. Thank you.
So I wanted to, and Bridget, I'll go to you next. I wanted to highlight something Renee said over here on Rumble. As of 2007, Opus Dei was still alive and kicking down in Peru. And that is absolutely true. Peru is a hot mess. Used to do business down there, and the daughter of the business owner I dealt with was wrapped up in a cult-like system of Opus Dei. Bridget, go ahead.
Just to elaborate on, and Sean is absolutely right in that there's an international criminal syndicate, you know, that was attempting to take over. And to put in perspective how fragile their long-term plan, and it was a long-term plan that we traced all the way back to the Fabian Society, and actually previous to that. It was a very deliberate, widespread global plan that encompassed all the countries. And we also had, if you go back and listen to some of the Colonel's pinned profile, it has a bunch of recordings of our other spaces that will also kind of give you a bigger idea. And we went globally, country by country, because they had planned on sectioning the world off into pan-Europe, in these big groups that they were going to have leaders over. And to show you how fragile that plan was, because it was, as we brought up, I think, last space, the frog in the water, and the water gets hotter and hotter and hotter until eventually the water boils and kills the frog. We were that frog in that water. And as they were heating it up, nobody was particularly aware, and those who were aware felt that they were powerless. They had control of everything, and as with the recent declassified information came out on USAID to show you how they are dismantling their very elaborate plan, how USAID was funding all of these news media agencies all over the world, not just in the United States and not just over in Europe, but all over the world. And when Trump came out, the most powerful words, and I'll say this to the day I die, the most powerful words he ever said and started to unravel that plan was fake news. When he started calling out just that simple phrase, fake news, a whole mass awakening of people started looking and realizing, yes, it was fake news. And yes, what they were reporting was not what they were seeing. And that was the beginning of the end, in my opinion. The beginning of the end of their control on everything, and to show how elaborate their good guys' plan was. It also went through just how they're dismantling it. The day that Trump got, because it sounds, for those of you who are not necessarily from the United States or have been following it quite as closely, the day Trump got sworn in, the moment that he was sworn in, the entire White House website was completely fully and functioning and had a video, a massive video on it about taking back control of our country. That can't have been done in a matter of hours. Normally, it takes months before the White House website is up and fully functioning. They came in, they were poised, ready, and moving, and when they hit the ground, they all had a purpose, they all had a mission, and they had a way of circumventing what they knew, the bad guys, because one of the reason why we're doing this, and I promise I'll wrap it up, is the patterns. We're showing you guys these things because they really have a simple playbook, and they do this over and over and over again. And once you recognize those patterns, it's very easy to see what they're going to do next. And it is my informed belief that they knew this, and they knew exactly what they were going to do, because it's the same thing they've always done. But what they didn't expect was something different, something new. And then came in Doge, and also came in how Elon bought X. The whole thing is just, it's a beautifully masterful, sitting back and watching an artist paint, and you don't realize what they're painting until the very end. Thank you.
Sure. Miles, go ahead.
Hi, Colonel. Hope you had a good weekend.
I had a wonderful weekend. Thank you for asking.
I'm sure you did. My question is, have you ever had a sit down with General Quast? Quast, yeah.
Yes, I have. He's my neighbor.
Oh, wonderful. That's even better. So I'm pretty sure he's approves of what you and we are doing, right? With Operation Gladio?
I don't know why that matters. I don't go off of his approval. I mean, is he aware of what I do? Yes.
Oh, that's good. So, look, I think with the general and you being the tip of the ear, they never had a chance.
Well, I don't think.
Now that I know
I don't think I'm part of. Well, I'm not part of an operation. Okay, I am one person. I didn't even know General Quast lived in the same town as me until April. Was it April? Until whatever GART, the Great America Restoration Tour that happened in Cocoa Beach. Him and his wife, Joni, sat at a table next to me. And he got up and spoke. And for me, as a colonel, I felt kind of awkward being there just because of the general nature of many of the people that are there, and what they believe is not necessarily consistent with what I believe, but there are good-hearted patriots, and I wanted to be there in order to introduce people to Operation Gladio. And there are a lot of people that talk a lot on podcasts there, which was the only reason I went. And I had not appeared on Badland Media. They didn't even know who I was. So when he got up and spoke at the next break, I just went up to him and introduced myself. to him and his wife. Now, I'm actually much better friends with his wife. I love her to death. She's like my twin. And she is the one that introduced me to Mr. Truth Bomb. And the whole reason I started following him, because she's a big fan of his. And so when I went up to talk to him, I asked her if they lived around in Florida. And they're like, yeah, we live in Lakeland, because of course we're over in Cocoa Beach. And I'm like, well, where do you live in Lakeland? And it's literally not even 5 minutes from my house. So we've had dinner. They come over for all of the Badlands media fan clubs. As a matter of fact, his wife and I and one other friend of mine are the ones that organize all of them. So yes, I talk with them frequently. And he always is one of the panel members when we have our Badlands fan club meetups here, as am I and the Cates brothers and whoever else. Stormy Patriot Joe tends to show up to several of them as well. So I had done my own thing before I ever met him. I've known them less than a year, even though they've lived here for like 3 years. And I just want to make sure everybody understands I'm not doing something that other people approve of or disapprove of, and I'm not doing anything in coordination with anybody else. As a matter of fact, I would say it's quite the opposite. And to be honest with you, since we're all family here, I've been very discouraged, actually, other than a few people like Brian and his brother and a couple others, like Alpha. And again, I didn't know Alpha. I met Alpha through Ron Partain in Warhamster. There's very few people that have supported me in this community. Very few, almost none. As far as promoting this. And I've had people basically off the record say things to me that basically, yeah, that was something that happened in the past and it's not really all that relevant because, you know, there's a plan and Trump's in charge. And my response to people like that is, why don't you go tell the Slovakian president that was shot 5 times a few months ago that not to worry about that? That's all superficial. And sorry for your luck. That's just going to be part of the plan. That type of discourse to me is very dangerous, because if you actually believe that we're fighting a war, even if it's an information war that has kinetic aspects to it, the enemy always gets a vote. Until the enemy is completely vanquished, they have a vote. They have ammunition. They've killed millions of people. And so in many respects, it has been a very, very difficult road to hoe. And I have been very open and honest with all of you guys about the ups of doing this and the downs of doing this. So I'm going to share with you one more. Yesterday, and I'm not going to tell you who said this, but I got a message. So Bridget does a lot of the legwork in finding posts on X for me to respond to. That has to do with Operation Gladio. And she does an excellent job, sometimes way too good of a job and way too late at night. But I'm just kidding, kind of. Boone Cutler, who I love and respect completely, is very close with General Flynn. And he posted yesterday morning about how Taiwan is basically still the government in charge of mainland China. So Bridget sends me the link and goes, I'm sorry, it's early, but I had to show you this, because she knows that, you know, I'm going to my head's going to blow up. And then after I responded respectfully, even though I had to do a lot of deleting to make it as respectful as I could. And I did. And then I sat on it for like 15 minutes and went back and reread it, which is what everyone should do, actually. I hit send, and then because I am good friends with Brian Cates and Dwayne Cates, I texted both of them the chain of events there. And so I didn't hear back from either one of them. And I'm like, did you guys read that? And Brian's like, yeah, I reposted it. And Dwayne goes, yeah, I was too scared to. He said, I knew as soon as I read that I was going to read a Colonel Towner response. He said, you actually took a lot longer than I thought you would. And I told him, because Brian, they're now like my brothers, by the way. Brian, the other day at dinner, last Wednesday, as a matter of fact, told me that part of the reason that that I'm a little off-putting by the way I respond to people. And I laughed my ass off because Brian yells at people like on purpose in his videos. I'm sure you guys have seen his podcast, which is why I love him, by the way. That doesn't offend me at all, nor does his language. And I laughed out loud. I looked at Dwayne and I said, can you believe that Brian Cates is telling me I need to watch my language or my approach? I looked at Brian and I said, dude, you scream at people online in your podcast, please. So, of course, we had a big laugh about the whole thing. But anyway, it has definitely been a very interesting journey. All right, Texas, go ahead. Annie?
Oh, there are two hands ahead of me.
Okay, well, just go. I've already called on you. Go. I'll get to the other two.
Okay. I just wanted to say I got an email today saying that my money was refunded through PayPal for the T-shirt because that person's account is not confirmed.
I don't know. My daughter is doing all of that.
Okay, well, have her look into that.
I will do that.
If I need to, I'll pay again.
You can DM me if you wouldn't mind, so I can copy and paste what your email address is, so we know which one you're in. Which one is you? Because let me just tell you what's funny is I helped her pack all of those orders, and because you all had to use your real names, I have no idea who you are. It was so funny because I'm looking at these names going, I know these are probably some of the people that talk all the time on the podcast. And I literally recognize maybe two people because most of you don't use your real names. And I'm just like throwing the crap in the bags. I'm like, I don't even know who these are. If I had known who you were, I'd have wrote you notes, but I didn't. So it was kind of funny. Jose or Joseph, sorry.
Hey, Colonel, how are you?
I'm good. How are you?
Good. So a little story about Lakeland, Florida. I've been there one time, and it was really nice out there. It was during my Little League baseball. We had a tournament down there. So it's a nice part of Florida. And I'm kind of sad to hear that more people don't support you out there, because what you're doing, you should be proud of it. There's a lot of people in our government that shy away from talking about this kind of stuff, and how are we ever going to change something, or how are we ever going to have an influence over our own government if we don't talk about it, And speaking of this current government, the Trump administration, I feel he's treading on very dangerous waters, and the foreign influence is still there, and it's like he hasn't learned anything, from the past. Last time he was in power, he wasn't even letting Christians from the countries where he imposed a ban on Muslims. He was not even allowing Christians from those countries to come to the United States. So I think the rhetoric he's spewing out there about Iran is very dangerous. You should not listen to Netanyahu because it could just end us up in another war, which, like Gladio has been involved and the CIA has been involved there since 1953 when they did the coup to overthrow Mossadegh, which was led by the Dulles brothers. So it's an ongoing thing. I think the Middle East would be a lot more stable if we just left it alone and worried about our own country. And the United States has no business there, and it's totally counterproductive to Trump's America First agenda, the supposed agenda. And I believe he's operating out of fear.
Joseph, hold on.
Hold on.
Let her respond now, please.
I'm sorry.
So obviously I disagree with you, Joseph. To say that Trump went through 4 years of being president and didn't learn anything, I think is a complete mischaracterization. I think Trump knew a lot going into the first presidency. I don't think it's as obvious to most people what he did do. Because one of the things that I have learned, and I understand, by the way, your frustration, because a lot of the stuff is not obvious on the surface. So from a Gladio perspective, which is all I'm going to address, the dismantling of crypto AG, one of the most notorious, a lot of people are very familiar with the Promise software. Almost no one, I'd never heard of anyone talk about crypto AG until I began talking about it. It's not that people didn't know about it. No one in the United States had ever heard of it. It was much more pervasive and much more well used. Trump shut it down. And because no one in the United States even knew that it existed, no one realized when it was shut down. Can you guys hear me?
Colonel, we lost you there for a second.
Can you hear me now?
They really don't like her talking. Bridget, go ahead until Colonel gets back in, because we can't hear her.
Can you hear me now?
Yeah, we can hear you now, Colonel.
Okay. So if people in the United States have never heard of crypto AG, the dismantling of that entire apparatus, when it happened in 2020 under his presidency, no one's going to even know about it. And therefore, you think he's doing nothing. And to say that he did nothing or that he didn't learn anything, while at the same time he began negotiations and a relationship with North Korea after he was specifically told by many people, to include Obama, that he wasn't allowed to talk to North Korea. And there's a lot of reasons why that was, all of which has to do with the fact that we were lied to constantly about what North Korea is and was. The same thing with China. There is a completely different thing that is happening versus the words that are being used. And if you don't watch what is being done as opposed to what the verbiage is, you're going to miss all of the important stuff. And one of the examples that I like to use is the Panama Canal. Now, I'm going to take every opportunity when Trump highlights something to point out factual history about it as it relates to Operation Gladio. And of course, Panama had a huge history as it related to Operation Gladio. But what Trump did in talking and bringing that up, he wanted to go 10 miles and so he throws a flare that lands about 30 miles downfield and downrange. And so he doesn't want to go 30 miles downrange. He wants to go 10. But because he gets everybody talking about the 30-mile marker, when they compromise on the 10-mile marker, he's won without actually even having to fight. And if you don't understand that as a technique in getting where you want to go, you are going to think that he never gets anything done because he shot for 30 and got 10 without realizing he only ever wanted 10 to begin with. And in many cases, because that happens, it is the rhetoric, it is the discussion, the whole thing about North Korea and, little rocket man, and I've got a button that works. That kind of stuff, when you've lived overseas, you understand how important that type of communication is, because most of these people that are in charge of countries work on the big stick rule. And when Trump welds his big stick, they do listen. And you're not going to understand, because you're not privy, nor am I, to the internal negotiations. Now, when I was at the Pentagon and when I was at US Central Command, I understand what was going out over the waves from US Central Command and from the president during the aftermath of 9/11 looked zero like what was happening on the ground. I watched it firsthand. I watched the news. I sat in the crisis action team, the CAT, at US Central Command, in what you would refer to as the belly of the beast. We had up on the walls like 7 or 8 screens. 6 screens were footage from the AOR. Like, we have ARCENT headquarters forward, we had ABSENT headquarters forward, we had gunship video if there was an ongoing operation, video up there. So you have all of these, and I mean, there's huge ass large screen TVs. At the corner on the left and the right was 2 different news stations, primarily CNN, sometimes Fox News, sometimes NBC or CBS or ABC, but always 2 at the very ends. And you're listening to, because it's in the immediate aftermath of 9/11, you're listening to the news. You are watching the video feeds. You know exactly what's going on in the AOR on these other screens. And they have zero to do with each other. And then the president is out there saying all kinds of other shit. And so you realize how what they're saying isn't necessarily what they're doing behind the scenes. And if you can grasp that and wait to see what the outcomes of the verbiage wars are, then you understand what has gone on behind the scenes. Just like he recently said, basically he went from we're taking over the Panama Canal to Panama agreed that they're going to not allow Chinese to run the harbor agreements. And that's probably all he ever wanted to begin with. But we started off with basically, we're going to go down and retake the Panama Canal. That's a tactic. And when you're dealing with people who have been backed up or put in place, for that matter, by the CIA after a coup, or after meddling in their elections, and they don't like you to begin with, you have to convince them to do shit your way. And you have to do it in a very unconventional way. You've got to get their attention. Do I think Trump is going to get us into a war? No. Do I think that he has any fear of launching a few missiles? Absolutely not. I don't want to be involved in Iran or anything in the Middle East. The only reason that we have been involved in those in the past is because greedy corporate interest in the United States, as part of the international syndicate, wanted all of their shit. We have our own shit, and that's the reason why our shit's been turned off, because we want to go wreck their shit and steal all of their shit. And that has to stop. We've got our own oil. We need to use it. We've got all of our own resources. We need to use them. And we need to stop going around the world beating up other people to steal their shit. So we agree on a lot. I disagree with your assessment of what's going on. But I think we fundamentally agree on.
You won me over. You won me over to your side, because, it totally makes sense that, he's talking a big game, trying to get 10 instead of 30.
Yes.
It makes sense.
Yes. And that's the way you have to do it on that playing field, because you have to understand almost every world leader right now was put in their place by the CIA. They have to fear you enough to know you're going to kick their ass. and that you are shutting down the CIA, which is their lifeline. That's why it's critical that he shut down USAID and NED. Those are the bastards that were paying these stooges that the CIA put in these dictatorships and in these fraudulent elections around the world. You had to shut down their money. And now they're all sitting ducks. They have no money coming in. And they're going to get overthrown by their own people now because they don't have the money to suppress them. And the NGOs, bastards that they are not going to be in there to mount their foot soldiers to keep the people at bay. They are literally going to get eaten up by the people that they walked on to get where they're at. They're shaking in their boots right now. Bridget, go ahead. Oh, I'm sorry, Carrie, and then Bridget.
Hey, Carl. I really loved that post you had about the baby pigs and the mama pig. That was really good. That was really funny. The other thing is, I'm not sure you guys know about mass formation psychosis. Do you know about that? Have you heard about that?
I've heard about it. I don't know that much about it.
Well, the idea, I'll post something in the pill, but the idea is, and it's based on some stuff that happened in former Soviet Union Eastern Bloc areas. Basically what it is that the amount of people that remain basically in reality and don't fall for the all the lies and stuff, the psyops, doesn't matter. But that people do stay in reality is really important. Not the amount of people, but that some people hold the line and they will not move from reality. It's like they're holding the front, if you think about it in military terms. But it's like your soul and your psychology and your behavior and your life. You will not move from that place. And I'm bringing it up because of some things you and Bridget said. And I just want to say that you are one of those people that is holding the front. And it makes, by this theory, it makes every difference in the world that you exist.
Well, let me add something to that, because what you just described is the importance on things like what happened with the shot. They can't have someone resisting. If they don't get everybody, they basically might as well have gotten no one, because as long as there's one standing, there's going to be the control group, right? That's the whole problem with their vaccination schedules for children. They have the control group of the Amish people that prove everything that they're doing to the rest of the kids is detrimental to their health. When PSYOPs always fail if you have a group that doesn't participate. And it doesn't, as you point out, matter how big that group is. There has to be a group that doesn't participate. And as long as that group doesn't participate and survives, then the rest of the shit, everybody else is going to be left eventually going, what the hell? Why didn't I just do that? And that became very apparent during the whole PSYOPs with COVID and people running out and getting the vaccine. And then they became much more ill than the people who didn't. And after they showed their ass, and some of them, and basically attacked those of us who refused to comply. And as long as you have a control group, that's always going to happen. So it is important to stand. It's just not easy. Bridget, go ahead. Bridget, if you're talking, we can't understand. We can't hear you. Let me drop her down.
Okay, can you hear me? Wait,
Yeah,
can
yeah.
you hear me now?
Yes, I can.
Okay. Sorry. Okay, the question was from over on Rumble, and the Minnesota Patriot 76 wanted, and you do a much better job at explaining the FEMA camps. He was talking about how, if that was part of a Operation Gladio preparation, and someone brought up Rex 84.
So if you go back and you look at, and we talked about this, so I think that show that I recorded with JJ Carroll will be out on Thursday, according to what he said. He has a professional production company that does edits and all that other stuff. So I don't know what it's going to say. I know what I said. I just don't know what it's going to say. One of the things that I brought up, which kind of, I think, shocked him, is the fact that the Phoenix program was implemented in the United States. Part of the Phoenix program, what we refer to as the camps, you can look at what they did in the Phoenix program in Vietnam, and this has been done in other instances. It was done in Malaysia by the UK even before we did it in Vietnam. But basically, they took villages that had existed for hundreds of years, burned them to the ground. They recreated a village with like a moat around it. So you couldn't get in or out without going through their check post. That basically is a FEMA camp. They had different names for it over there. But the whole idea was control of everything that you do and controlling access. So they did it in Vietnam under the auspices of, we don't want you affiliating with the Viet Cong. And so we're going to set this new city up, this hamlet, and we're going to surround it with a moat. And we're not going to let you move in and out of this so we can control your contact. And therefore, you can't be contaminated with Viet Cong affiliations. Because they knew they didn't have a winning message. They were there for evil. They realized that the only person that really cared about Vietnam at the time and reuniting the entire Vietnamese was Ho Chi Minh, and he was winning the propaganda campaign. We can talk about whether he was communist or not at a different time. But the philosophy of one Vietnam basically won over a lot more than what the CIA was anticipating. And, you know, we all know how the outcome of that whole thing happened. But what was critical from that perspective is they got to test all of the concepts of setting up what they are now trying to sell us on as smart cities. And it's weird that you have all of these major fires all over the United States and these weather events when that's basically what they did in Vietnam in order to create the impetus to create these fake cities in order to be able to control everybody. So if you use the camps as the transition phase of getting us into smart cities, that is in fact what what a lot of people forecasted for anyone who didn't take the vaccine, right? We were going to be rounded up and put in a camp for noncompliance as domestic terrorists. And the conditioning that happened around that entire subject was a psychological operation. It was an attack on the sovereignty of America. And the amount of people that refused to comply, I believe, overwhelmed their system. Not to discount the fact that Trump, because they anticipated the vaccine solution to be an 8 or 9 year endeavor. By doing what Trump did in less than a year, you can argue about the vaccine all day long. It's not even relevant to this conversation. By doing it in a year, they were not able to continue the lockdowns to the point where they could transition people who non-complied with the eventual delivery of one into FEMA camps. So there was a significant interruption to a plan that they had already articulated and war gamed out as how they were going to unfold this whole thing. So hopefully that helps.
Thank you. Yeah, it's not a short answer that I could have given, in a chat.
Right.
And it's very integral, I think, to understand, and goes back to what we were just talking about, how he thwarted their plan, how their plan was set up, how this whole thing was planned out. And they've gone through the test runs and this repeating patterns over and over that we have found and are continuing to expose. Thank you.
Okay. Any other hands? Nope. All right. We're going to call it a day. You guys have a wonderful evening. And we will be back. Stellar, are we going to be on tonight?
I believe so. I haven't heard otherwise. Kelly's in here. We could ask her because I know she had a question as well. Golfing was here, but he left.
I'm sure he's busy at work. Okay. So tomorrow night, just looking over.
It's Donald Trump Day. It's Donald Trump Day and JFK Day and Abraham Lincoln Day and Thomas Jefferson Day. I can't think of any other good presidents. Sorry.
Okay. So just go over some of the upcoming events for this week. Obviously, we're going to be here at 4:00, but I will be on the missing link again. I've been on there like 3 or 4 times at 9:00 tomorrow night. On Wednesday, we do the Alpha Warrior show, of course. On Thursday, that should be the release of the J.J. Carroll interview, as well as War Hamster at noon and our normal 4:00. And then we just have the one on Friday. So it's going to be a light week. No more 5 shows in one day week. So anyway, yeah, that's all good. So again, thank you all for being here. I appreciate it. I appreciate all the support. The good news is, and please don't take anything I said as me bitching and complaining. The only reason we went from 300 people following us on X to 30,000 is you guys. Each and every one of you guys. You guys have been the most amazing people in the world. And let me just tell you, a lot of you guys are very, very articulate. I go through when you tag me on stuff and I read what you post on other people's threads. Simply amazing. You guys make me proud every single day. It definitely makes the hours worth of preparation definitely worth it. And obviously all of the research that goes along with this, just totally amazing. And we can all pat ourselves on the back. Everybody else is just now all figuring out what we already know. The revelations that Data Republican, as frustrating as it is, the way they word it, like they just found out. Hello, we've been over here screaming this shit for the better part of 2 years. But again, all that matters is the information gets out. You guys will see me and you can hear me saying it in my own voice. Sometimes the frustration gets the better of me, depending on who's saying what. But eventually everybody is going to know this because it's the truth. And the truth always wins because God wins and he is the truth. So, Stellar, go ahead.
Sorry. I was also going to say that, seeing all the departments of Doge that's exposing all the different things. I don't know if you guys saw that, but Doge doesn't just have Doge. He's broken it down with financial, with this, and that. All of this stuff is for all of us to watch and follow and put our 2 cents in there and keep tagging Colonel Towner in this stuff. We got to get her on Tucker Carlson, guys. That's the goal. Because Operation Gladio, it's still going on today, and it's happening here in the U.S. And a lot of this stuff that is, all the money going to U.S. aid, and as they do more will be uncovered. Everything's going to end up being tokenized, open source. Get familiar with what they're talking about and understand that, yes, what he's doing, negotiations, art of war, ask for everything, and only, of the 30%, and, he only wanted the 10% anyway, because, that's just how it is. We have our own stuff going on here. We have to make, and also Colonel Tanner, the ones that you don't tame it down, because those are the ones that we love the most. We love your fire, man. And Kelly, go ahead.
I agree with you. We loved her fire. That said, so Colonel, you can pass on this question if you already kind of got to it. I know I was in and out, but I was listening to somewhat at the beginning, I guess, of the space, and you were talking about I can't remember, like Richard Vaughn's Cloud or something, Kalergi. I don't know his whole name, but what do you say, or what would you say to people or organizations who are quick to dismiss the Kalergi plan, or I don't know however you say that, as either a conspiracy theory or painted as the big racist boogie monster it's basically portrayed as? Can you break down the Kalergi plan as something more than the textbook race card move, and as something, as you are kind of articulating, just more sinister than the practical idealism? I know you see what I did there. Of the the European unity, and there's never been borders, we're all kind of cattle, and I don't know. So there's my kind of convoluted question there.
So no, I mean, it's not convoluted, obviously. The Kalergi is not a conspiracy. I mean, he's a real man. He had an agenda. His agenda was basically part and parcel of the Fabian Society. So it is, they tried to dismiss I don't know the best way to say this. So if you understand that the Fabian Society believed that Blacks were inferior, and that they were going to be cast as a slave colony in this greater Pan-America, Pan-British Empire, Pan-Europe, Pan-Asia, Pan-Arabic round table configuration of ruling the world in one world government. The fact that was their plan, and the very first because the Pan-British Empire had already been created. So they already basically had, at this time, they had India, Australia, Canada. So, they're set. They've got their seat at the table. But collectively, they had to set up a Pan-Europe, because Europe was only going to get one seat at the table. They're going to have a Pan-America, and basically the U.S. was going to represent the Americas. And so in order to do this, you had to basically subordinate or colonialize Africa, because most of these entities in Europe and specifically the British Empire, they didn't necessarily have everything that they needed in order to live the lifestyles that they had grown accustomed to. And you have to be able to dominate other areas in order to do that. And so a lot of people basically want to wrap all of that up into a quote unquote Kalergi plan, and then say, oh, this is a conspiracy theory, and so you can throw out the entire thing. It's the CIA basically trying to discredit what they know to be an actual agenda. All you have to do is look at the Fabian Society's mascot. It's literally a wolf in sheep's clothing. So and you can't disprove what they actually did. And it's been emphasized by the exposure of USAID. USAID literally sent survey teams into countries to find the fault lines, whether it be race, whether it be sexual in nature, whether it be gender in nature. They were sent in as spies to find out if it's ethnically related, like the Hutsis and the Tutsis and Rwanda, or whether it's going to be some disenfranchised, sexually oriented population or whatever. And they brought the results of these surveys back, and they were gone over by basically psychological operations people in order to craft the best plan for that country to sow destabilization and to overthrow the government. Now, you want to have a plan on a shelf, because at some point you have some of your people already installed as dictators or fascist anyway, that's going to be under your control. But you want those updated so you can keep tabs on that guy, because as we have seen in the case of people like Batista, some of these people get out of control, right? So, and Saddam Hussein. So we're going to eventually want to overthrow them too. So just because you have your guy in doesn't mean you stop at that point. And you understand how the wrap up smear works, how you can throw out an entire idea by wrapping it up in one person. That to me is what they did with him. It doesn't negate the fact that he did what he did. It doesn't negate the fact that that was all part of the plan, but they can kind of try to throw out the entire underpinnings of Operation Gladio and its history of the Fabian Society, the British Round Table, and all of that crap by putting it in one guy that they've now polarized, and we've discredited him, and therefore now the whole thing is a conspiracy theory, which is all bullshit. That's an excellent question, Kelly.
Well, thank you for being so thorough with your answer. You always, blow me away with how, it doesn't matter what I come with, what level of retardation I come at you with. I can't even put my words in the right order, and you're just like boom, 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 boom. But yeah, I appreciate you.
But actually, that's not a retarded question at all. It actually illustrates exactly the way this machine works. It's an excellent question. Carrie, go ahead.
Yeah, I forgot to say before that in activist circles and stuff, we understood a lot about North Korea and their propaganda there, because people went there and filmed it and stuff. So the thing about Trump going to North Korea was it completely undercut all of their propaganda. And I'm not sure Americans appreciate that. We were their enemy, mortal enemy. And the other thing I want to say is fuck Tucker Carlson.
I don't know what that means. But anyway.
It means I think he's a limited hangout.
Okay, well, I don't agree with that.
To Benz. He loves Benz. He doesn't get it.
I don't agree with that. I don't think he's limited to hangout. I think there is an exposure that needs to happen. I think he, especially the last interview he conducted with Benz, he was as mystified by him trying to rationalize a international syndicate as the rest of us, and maybe he's exposing him as a result of that. But anyway, Ada, did you come up before we're way over time? I'll let you speak if you have a question.
Yes, just one thing. I'm sorry. It is a little late, but I can't wait for this answer. I have this question. I'm from Cuba. As you well know, Colonel, the people from Cuba are on slavery, has been on slavery not you mentioned Batista, and I say I had to jump in here. I always wonder what happened with the United States that doesn't seem to be interested in the danger that we have here 90 miles from the United States when Putin is there, the Muslims are there, Hamas is there, China is there, because they have sold our country to anyone who wants to pay, because Cuba doesn't produce anything. They have destroyed totally the country. They don't produce anything. They owe money to Russia, but trillions on trillions. And I don't see America. I see that Trump was working on his first term on the background, like for example, Western Union. He's the Western Union from allowing to send money from America to Cuba and little things that I said Trump is working on helping the Cuban people, because also it's an area that is the key for the Caribbean, very important, strategic. We're talking about Greenland. What about Cuba? It's 90 miles from here. What do you have to say about that?
Well, Ada, everybody that you just mentioned that you believe is a threat to the United States because they're 90 miles off the coast of the United States are actually inside the United States. So I don't believe Al-Qaeda or being in Cuba or any extremist terrorist group being in Cuba is more of a threat than them actually being in the United States, and they're actually in the United States. And I don't believe that Russia is our enemy. That's a propaganda campaign tactic that people have used in order, because these same people that are destabilizing countries that basically destabilized Cuba and made it the mafia campground off the coast of the United States are the same people that have destabilized countries all over the world. The destabilization is the problem. If the intelligence networks and the international syndicates that basically had went down there, because Cuba prior to Castro was not actually owned in large part by Cubans. You had people like William Pauly who owned your airline. You had people like William Pauly who owned the entire bus franchise on the entire island. He owned a lot of the big major sugar plantations. And the United Fruit was owned a bunch of the land there. And there were corrupt land deals that was basically taking the land away from their rightful owners under a corrupt Batista government. I mean, that was what brought the entire revolution. And the people that initially supported Castro, who apparently after he got in power, like many people who get in power, betrayed many of the people that had participated in the revolution. And so I feel for the people in Cuba and what has happened to them. But I don't believe there's anybody in Cuba that is more of a threat than the people inside the United States that have been imported here by the same intelligence apparatus that destroyed Cuba to begin with. So
Agree. Even I have seen spies and bad people from Cuba allowed to come into this country.
Yeah.
I agree.
Yeah.
And I also agree that Putin have held the Cuban people, not the government really. Right now they are being in petroleum. When Venezuela stopped giving them, they're giving them petroleum. But I also believe that helping them is because the government keep everything. They don't give it to the people. It allows them to get more power. So I can't wait to see. I'm excited to see what Trump is going to do by using the rest of the world on behalf of the Cuban people.
Yeah, I agree. I'm very excited to see what Trump's going to do as well. All right, guys. Thank you for being here. Appreciate everybody. We will be back tomorrow, and I will be looking for the pond if you guys go ahead with that tonight. So thanks, everybody. Take care. Okay, we're out over there. Let's see. I just wanted to pick up the last couple. I had claims a few years back. COVID-19. Okay, that's retirement. Anything over here? Yeah, I was a big Bill Cooper fan too. It was hard to believe most of what he said. He was definitely way ahead of his time, as was many people back then. And unfortunately, many of them ended up dead unexpectedly. Weirdly enough, like a lot of the really good investigative reporters exposing Operation Gladio. So anyway, all right, you guys take care. Good night. See you tomorrow.